Hello, doggies and kitties. This is I think what this is episode number 73 of the Raw Men podcast. Welcome, everybody. And today I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Jonny Scaramanga. I love your name. just the way that rolls off the tongue. Yeah, he paid a social visit when he was coming through a tour of the States. It was great fun. I was happy to run into him here. And today I want to interview him on the subject of your recently acquired PhD. Dr. Jonny, and what you understand is a doctorate in education, specifically on students who attended fundamentalist Christian schools in England.
Yeah,
that's to me that's fascinating. A focus of your study. I'm curious how you even did the research for that. I mean, that sounds like a situation where I would have been, possibly driven mad just in the research.
right.
I'm guessing you had to go, personally and read lesson plans and listen to tutorials and so forth. Is that right?
Well, so I went to a fundamentalist Christian school for 3.5 years, from when I was 11 until I was almost 15. And so luckily I had a lot of the background from that. And that was both a blessing and a curse when I was doing the PhD. The blessing was that I already knew a lot about it. I went into my doctoral studies already probably knowing a PhD's worth of stuff on the subject. The downside of it was that I had already done some campaigning against them, so nobody wanted to talk to me. None of the people who were in favor of them, they just, as one, I've got a whole section in my thesis where I talk about this, where they were just refusing to talk to me. One guy that ran a Christian school emailed me back and said not only was he not going to talk to me, but he'd emailed everyone he knew to tell them not to talk to me in advance. So there was like a real kind of stonewalling there. But
I gotta ask you a question. When you said that you already campaigned against them, what do you mean?
So it began in 2009. I went to the Times Education Supplement because a government agency in the UK had said that the certificate that you get for completing your studies at one of these schools is equivalent to, they didn't use the word equivalent, and later they got really pernickety about the difference between equivalent and comparable, which is what they did say. But this government agency had approved the certificate that you got for going to one of these schools, and they'd said it was as good as something that you'd get for going to a much more reputable school. And so I wrote to this agency, NARIC, and I also wrote to the Times Education Supplement, which is a magazine for teachers in the UK. And I said, this can't be right, because I went to one of these schools and they told me that the Loch Ness monster is real and that that's a reason to doubt the theory of evolution. And that was among many reasons that I gave for like, this cannot be true. And I assumed at that time that this was just so obviously wrong that NARIC would turn around and say, oh, there's been an oversight here. You're quite right. This should never have happened. We'll change this immediately. I really did not expect this to turn into a lengthy campaign. And
so I'm guessing the same thing happened to you as did me when I presented an egregious factual error to our Board of Education, and I fully expected that they would just concede, oh yes, that's incorrect, we'll have to fix that. But instead they doubled down and would never admit that error.
That is pretty much the situation, yes. And it got weirder from there. NARIC issued a statement saying a copy of our report is available on request. So I and the British Humanist Association immediately wrote to them and said, well, can we see the report, please? And they refused. And they refused for months and months and months and months and months. And then they said, we're going to write a new report, so you can see the new report when that's done. So then we chased them for months, and eventually the new report was done, at which point they said, oh, actually, this is a commercial document because the Christian curriculum company paid us to write this for them. And because it's commercial, it's in confidence, and we can't show it to you. So we've never seen, we do not know what was in that report, and we probably never will know. And they're not subject to freedom of information laws because although they are a government agency, they are outsourced to a private company, and private companies are not subject to freedom of information laws in this country. So that's it. That was it. So I got quite a lot of press off this. If you, at one point in 2012, when the second report came out, it got so much coverage that if you type the word accelerated Christian education into Google, autofill completed it with Loch Ness monster, which was very satisfying.
Okay.
And that wasn't even from my point of view. Like, the Loch Ness monster thing was funny, but it wasn't about that. It was about the fact that this was a crap education all the way down. And I was training to be a teacher at the time. I was doing my teaching qualification, and as I learned about what good education is, all I could think about was my accelerated Christian education school and how it was the opposite of everything I was being taught that education should be, and everything that I'd learned. Just purely educationally, like, forget the dogma and the theology. Just the way they taught us was to screen us off individually, facing the wall with vertical screens between us, working through workbooks. I've got some of them here. This is what you do if you're in an ACE school. This is, I'll take this post-it note off. This is a packet of accelerated Christian education, and it is a self-contained workbook. So it contains all of the information you need to know and all of the activities that you need to do. So there'll be a block of text like this, which incorporates religious education into whatever the subject is. This is US history. And then there will be a sequence of fill in the blank exercises. So what you do is you look at the sentence that's here: on April 12th, 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt died, and blank. And then you have to look through this block of text before it and find the missing word and copy that missing word onto this blank. And then when you've done that, you get permission to leave your seat, and you go and compare what you've written on the blanks to an answer key that is supplied. And if all of your answers are the same, you move on to the next bit. And if some of your answers differ, then you have to go back and repeat the process until all of your answers are correct.
So what age group?
And that's everything you do.
What age group was that workbook you just showed?
So this is for 8th grade, but it makes no difference. I happen to have the 8th grade stuff to hand. I think upstairs I have some 4th grade stuff.
So this is embarrassing. So even in a Christian school, a fundamentalist Christian school in the UK, you're teaching American history in 8th grade.
Well, so
you have in the United States, before they start teaching history for a foreign country, you have to be in college.
Well, no. So the reason that we were doing US history when I was in school was because accelerated Christian education curriculum was written at that time in Texas. Now their headquarters has moved to just outside Nashville.
Of course.
And so the curriculum was all written in Texas and shipped out around the world. So they have now it's 6,000 schools around the world. It was a bit more back then. And so the reason we were doing US history is because everything's written in America from an American point of view. Now, what they've finally done now is they have written a British history course in the UK for UK students. So most UK students today doing this wouldn't be doing this US history unless they chose to do it as an elective. But I just have a particular interest in the US history course because it's so spectacularly full of propaganda. I mean, the whole curriculum is, but the US history one really is. Let me...
I can't argue with you there. I've got some experience with.
Let me read to you.
The United States has a way of sensationalizing everything, and if I can just pull out an observation for a moment, I remember watching some special on World War II, and they're interviewing American and British pilots, and the British pilots, you remember these are little old guys, because this is when we're talking about World War II, and so these guys, like here it is, like 60 years on, and these are aged little dudes, but I remember the British pilots were so calm and pleasant about the way things were happening. And you say, I just look over my shoulder and I see there's a group of Jerrys looking for a bit of a row. I'm like, this is how you refer to life and death situations. But then when you get to the American, well, the American has to, move his hands around, and he has to yell, and he has to be all excited, and he has to dramatize and exaggerate everything. And I'm just looking at these two thinking, the British guy's a lot cooler.
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes we're cool. Sometimes we just invade other countries and make them be our slaves. So
I just don't like sensationalism. I don't like the exaggerations and blowing everything out of proportion and try to make everything sound better than it is. I mean, I was watching a news story like yesterday where somebody's talking about these wildfires in California right now, and he says they're moving, as fast, they're at lightning speed. And I want to say, okay, so the entire neighborhood, it was ignited in the same second? Because if it was lightning speed, you understand that, 186,000 miles per second, you understand. But obviously that's not the case. And why is it that everything that they talk about on TV has razor sharp claws or teeth? Well, why is it? Nothing has razor sharp, certainly not everything. Yeah, sorry. It's just one of the little things that irritate me.
Yeah. So this will not surprise you at all. I didn't expect that we would talk about this. I thought we would stick to science. But this is how they introduced the section on the election of 1980. The 1960s and 70s were years of unrest in the United States. The nation experienced riots, assassinations, power shortages, and oil embargoes. So it's talking about how shit things were in the 1960s and 70s. Then it says, you almost need to read this in Team America voice. Then God raised up a conservative national leader. He advocated leaner government, lower taxes, and less regulation. He promised to curb inflation, reduce employment, cut taxes, reduce government regulation of business, and improve the nation's defenses. He was against abortion and supported strong families. He believed in prayer, Bible reading, and scriptural principles. This man was the former governor of California, Ronald W. Reagan.
I thought they were about to describe Camacho.
It's amazing. And so like this is how it goes. So it's like everything that a Democrat does is bad, and we learn about how Roosevelt was like just the worst guy in history that brought socialism to America, and then Reagan is like God's choice. And even like Jimmy Carter, they say Jimmy Carter claimed to be a Christian. They won't even call him a Christian. Whereas when it gets to Reagan, they're like, this is the man that God chose. And it was just that.
It doesn't matter that Carter is an evangelical, with like a Nobel Prize for peace and humanitarian efforts.
They're not interested in that. They're interested in low taxes, and I came out really. That's I guess why I'm so interested in their U.S. history course, because I did this and I absorbed it hook, line, and sinker. I was on another podcast the other day, and I was telling them that I came out of this system when Tony Blair was still the Prime Minister in England. He was a Labour Prime Minister, but he was pretty far to the right for Labour. And I remember telling someone at school I knew that supported Tony Blair when I left the far right Christian school and went to a more normal one. There was a kid there that said he liked Tony Blair, and I called him a communist. Yeah, because like goddamn commie. So I came out believing that it was against God's will for there to be a national health service, that was socialism. And I wasn't interested in listening to what anyone else had to say, because I was like, well, it doesn't matter if you've got better arguments than me or if you've got more evidence. I know what God says, so I don't even need to listen to you. So it took a really long time for my mind to be prized open from that. And I think that's why I'm so concerned about this happening in schools, because the reason they do this is because they know that the verse they always quote is Proverbs, I want to say 22 verse 9, is that the one? Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And I'm proof that that is at least not always true, but there's a lot in that, and that's why.
Yeah, there's a parallel in the Jesuit saying that, give me the child until he is 7, and I'll show you the man.
Exactly, and it's worrying. It's a system of indoctrination, and it's effective. I run a couple of survivor groups on Facebook. One of them is secret for people that can't come out yet, and one of them is public. And we have a few hundred members in the public one. And the pro ACE group, which I'm blocked from on Facebook, is called you know you went to an ACE school when, and it's got like 10,000 members. I know that those of us that have seen through the brainwashing are in the minority on this, and it's an effective system in a lot of cases.
It is, and it's disturbing how they get the children. I mean, they get all the children, right? I mean, because think about this. I mean, if we were going to be really objective, I mean, these people say, well, why don't you teach them both sides, the truth and the lie, that's the way they want to. But what they really want to do is that they want to reprimand anybody trying to give them an actual lesson in reality, so that grandma and their daycare centers and all like this can indoctrinate them as hard as they can until they're 7, and then finally turn them over to an education system. But anything you try to tell them that is actually scientifically true, then you're treated as if you're the abuser. You're the one that's coming in and breaking the family values and so forth. And so they always get that indoctrination. And so they always outlast us. But what would have happened, if there was some law that you can't, that all these kids have to go to public school and they can't be taught anything, religious until, X age or whatever. I mean, imagine that kids actually understand the realities of science and so forth. And then, when they're adults, suddenly, then they're told about talking snakes and donkeys and the sun stopping in the sky and guys living inside fish and all that sort of thing. How successful would that be then?
Exactly my point. And interestingly, when I started this campaign, the indoctrination hadn't even fully worn off. I was still hyper right wing in my political views when I first started talking about this. I believed that if you were poor, it was your fault, and that I voted Conservative in the election of 2010 even, but I was already campaigning against ACE. And I didn't actually disagree with much of their politics then, but I had figured out from going to better schools that a better education is to learn what the arguments are for different positions and to consider what there is to be said for different political points of view. And Christian schools will not do that. In fact, they preach against it. If you go on to the Accelerated Christian Education website, you can download a pamphlet called God's Mandate for Accelerated Christian Education, or for Christian education. And what that argues is that it is demonic to allow children to present children with different points of view and allow them to make their own minds up. That way leads to humanism, which to them is obviously a bogeyman term, and to evil and to sin and corruption. So so even the teach controversy thing, which I agree with you on something like evolution, is not the way to go because there is no scientific controversy. That's not even what ACE does. ACE teaches evolution as false. In fact, so they don't even tell kids until right at the end of 8th grade what evolution is. Up until then, the first 4 grades of ACE science curriculum is just memorizing what God did on each of the days of creation. That is the bulk of what they do for the first 4 years of science. And then finally, right at the end of 8th grade, we see the word evolution for the first time, and it's defined as the false theory that assumes that all forms of life develop from lower forms of life. So
which is false in its description. I mean, there's no higher or lower to begin with.
No, absolutely. So it's wrong all the way around. And this book is clearly written by someone that doesn't understand evolution. There are numerous misunderstandings in it. There's typical kind of, if evolution were true, we'd expect to see a bird turn into a frog type of arguments. And now,
when you get people on this is the thing that bothers me, that when you can show somebody why that statement is wrong, they will not correct it.
No, absolutely. And in fact, so this is the reason that I have this. This is from 2016, long after I went to school. But I was interested because I just completed my thesis about the previous edition, the edition that I went through school with and that the people I interviewed for my thesis went through school with. And I knew immediately people were going to turn around and say, well, your research is no longer relevant because you interviewed people that went to school 20 and 30 years ago. Things have changed since then. The new curriculum is different. So I went and bought the new curriculum. And sure enough, it hasn't changed in any meaningful way. But I needed this for evidence. But one of the things that is interesting is that stuff that was manifestly false and shown to be false long ago, lots of it they're hanging on to in this new edition. And so one example of that is the Paluxy tracks, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah, they're not that far from my house, actually.
Exactly. So for viewers who are not aware of this, there's a riverbed outside Glen Rose in Texas, which had fossilized dinosaur tracks on it, and what creationists claimed for some time were human footprints next to each other, which they say disprove the theory of evolution. And this has been so widely debunked that even other creationist organizations came out and said, okay, we shouldn't use this as an argument against evolution. It's making us look bad. But right up until 2016, ACE was still teaching this in their 8th grade science curriculum as fact, and with no indication that it was controversial. In this new 2016 edition, they do admit that other creationist organizations now no longer say that you should use this, but I'm trying to find the right page. Basically, the way that it comes across is that there was evidence, and but now either those fossils have been sold as souvenirs or hidden by those bad secular scientists. So the evidence is no longer there. But it kind of was. I think that's the impression that I would get if I were reading this as a student. So they just they won't let this stuff go, even the most egregious stuff.
So I don't want to focus just on creationism, because I mean that's what I always talk about. I mean, what else do you see as an issue with the fundamentalist schools? I mean, they're obviously misleading these kids for a purpose. They expect them to take a certain role in society once they've been, what is the word? Brainwashed, conditioned?
Indoctrinated is the word that I use in my thesis. I go in quite a lot of detail in my thesis about what I think indoctrination is and how I think it works. Because there's still actually it's not settled either among philosophers of education and there isn't a psychological model that's widely accepted either. So what I do in the thesis is I try to marry the psychological literature with the philosophical literature in the hope that we can get some consensus on this, because I don't think we can fight indoctrination until we're agreed on what it is that we're talking about. So I guess this is interesting to me because this is a conversation that I think we might be able to have that's quite productive. I think that for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily matter that much to their everyday lives how old they believe the Earth is. But creationism comes as like this package deal with a bunch of stuff that really does affect their daily lives, like sexism and homophobia and in ACE's case, racism.
Well, it's surprising how they're all so closely tied together. I'm recently seeing where Christian groups will suddenly pretend that they are the egalitarian ones, that they are the ones that they want to present this old idea that they tried to work it decades ago, but it failed, where they want to say that the evolutionists are the racists. You know, and that they are the ones who believe that there is only one race, when of course in American history you don't have to look very far back to find, you don't have to look back at all. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan currently, their website advertises right now. If you go to it right now, it'll show that there's a declaration right there on the front of the splash page that we do not believe in evolution. We are creationists. We believe that each race was created separately. You know, and yes. So they make that statement boldly. They're all creationists.
Absolutely.
So it's a funny thing when then they suddenly try to turn around, and Ken Ham does this. I mean, he tries to make it out like, you know, that the creationists are the ones that are not the racists. But even in his own presentation, he admits that the creationist school he was taught that you don't preach the gospel to the Aborigines because they're a different race.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. The Curse of Ham stuff was not a part of my education. And ACE is not an explicitly racist organization. It denies that it's racist, and it contains statements like no one should be oppressed because of their race.
Well, but at the same, everybody denies that they're racist.
Of course.
David Duke, the grand, what is it? Is he the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan? I might have him confused with somebody else, but you know, he makes this statement. I mean, he's in charge of the Ku Klux Klan, and he says he's not racist. If he's not racist, who the hell is?
Exactly. So I said all that to say that I mean, ACE, there's an organization called White Pride Homeschool, which is an explicitly white supremacist homeschool organization, and it includes ACE materials on its list of recommended educational materials for parents, which I think tells you something. So there are cartoons. Actually, they stop in 8th grade in these subjects, so I don't have them right here with me to show you, but I can give you some links. There are cartoons that run the way through these workbooks that the kids have to do, and they show Christian characters doing stereotypically Christian things, and they're supposed to be role models for the students to emulate. And in this fictitious universe where the cartoons are set, there's a city called Highland City, and there are 3 schools. And one of the schools is called Highland Christian School, one of them is called Harmony, and one of them, vomit-worthily, is called Hartsville Christian School. And everyone that goes to Highland Christian School is white. And everyone that goes to Harmony Christian School is black. And everyone that goes to Hartsville is other. So it's either Latino or Asian people. And this is not explicitly acknowledged in the PACES. It's not like they say, hey, look, these are segregated schools, but they are segregated schools. If you go through the cartoons, you sometimes you see the characters from the stories interacting with each other when they're shown around in the city or in different places, but when they're at church and when they're at school, they're segregated. And that's just one of many things. And when I was at school, 2 of the workbooks that I did contained defenses of apartheid in South Africa. One of those has been updated and changed. One of them hasn't. One of them, as of when I purchased a copy of it in 2013, and it was still defending apartheid.
Outstanding. So,
yeah.
And one of the other things, I mean, there's this weird correlation, not just to science denial, and then the racism, and then sexism, and then every other form of bigotry, and all like this whole lumped into a ball somehow, where you have to agree like on this whole package deal of different policies that everybody has to think the same on all of these things. Likewise, you were talking about we're conservatives and so forth. I mean, here in Texas, we have people that because I'm playing in politics right now. I mean, I've noticed that there are people who honestly think that they are born into their political party, that they're born Republican.
Right.
I don't see people born Democrat or born anything else, but they're definitely born Republican. And they think that they owe a lifeline, a genetic obligation for party loyalty, that they have to vote for the Republican candidate, and they'll vote on single issue, and it doesn't matter what the other issues are.
Well, and in a sense, there's some truth to that, because lots of people are, in fact, born into their political party. Lots of people do just absorb the indoctrination of their local culture and their parents and their churches and never question it. And so in that sense, they are born into the Republican Party, right?
I just can't imagine it myself, because I mean, I know I'm a freak. I know I am, because I was raised in a Muslim in a Mormon family, and I never identified as Mormon, because how would I know if I believe everything that you're required to believe as a Mormon? Or how do I know that there's some other religion wouldn't closer ally or make more sense to me than Mormonism does? So I would have to study all these other religions, and I would have to study Mormonism more before I could make that decision. But nobody else thinks like that.
No,
they think mom and dad are what is it, Lutheran? Well, then I'm Lutheran. No, and they're Republican. I'm Republican.
I mean, I really admire that. I think one of the things. So interestingly, some people that defend accelerated Christian education, I show them the outrageous stuff that's in the books, and incredibly, their defense of it is, it's okay, the kids don't really believe that stuff. Wow. And I feel, which is just like, what? But I feel super gaslighted by this, because I absolutely did believe all of it. I am really envious of people like you, and that story at the beginning of Hitchens' God is Not Great, where his teacher says, oh, can't you see that all this stuff is beautiful because God made it for us? And he immediately went, no, that's ridiculous. That's not it. I was not that independent minded at all. I swallowed everything, and it was a long and difficult process for me to think my way out of it, and required years and years of patient teachers helping me to think more open-mindedly about things.
At the risk of, or to help you out here. Okay. While I brag about my independent thought, I was raised in Southern California, Los Angeles, in the 1970s, man. So that had like a really strong effect on me, because everybody's into like woo, So it was so much psychic energy crap that, I mean, 1969, 1970, imagine I'm a little kid, right? And so I just have all of this psychic energy nonsense fed into me, so that I was fully indoctrinated into the pseudoscience woo hippie nonsense, that kind of spiritualism. So while I didn't get the Southern Baptist kind of thing that everybody else can relate to, I got something that I think was just as bad.
Right. Okay. Oh, I guess that makes you feel a little better. But Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think like that question of why, like what it is that makes some kids go, no. But I think part of what it is that it worked for me. Actually, I was good at following the rules, and I was good. Like I was someone, like, it mattered to me to be one of those kids who was good at school. So when religion is just part of what it is, what I'm told is expected of me to be good, this is another thing that I can do well at, right? So I can do well at English, I can do well at maths, and I can do well at being godly, and so I did. And so this is one of the things that came out of my thesis, is that the treatment of students in these schools, I think, has been wildly unequal, and it's not just, it's partly staff favoring kids that they like better, I think, but it's also, it's institutionalized. So ACE has a system of privileges, and if you memorize more Bible verses, and if you complete more work, and if you do more Christian services, then you get given tons more privileges. You get a break time that's like twice as long in the school day. You get the right to leave your seat without permission, which no one else has in an ACE school. And I mean, all kinds of things. At my school, if you got the highest level of privilege, you could pretty much do what you wanted. And whereas the kids that were ungodly, who weren't memorizing the Bible verses, who were getting too many demerits or detentions in the space of a week, were not, and they were just pretty much chained to their desks. So there is a level of religious discrimination which is quite institutionalized in the schools. It's quite explicit. And it's
We
just
like to think
wrong.
we like to think of the atheist movement here in the United States. We like to think that that the nuns are the fastest growing demographic, and it is in every state. We already outnumber Jews, which wasn't a big deal, but now we outnumber Catholics, and that is a big deal. And we are climbing faster than, and the Protestants are declining. I mean, all the Protestant denominations are declining together, and so we will end up eclipsing them. Unfortunately, it seems that we will end up eclipsing them right about the same time that Islam does, which is a fastest growing religion. So if things remain constant as they are, then there's a race between atheism and Islam as to which one of us will be dominant in 20 or 30 years. It won't be Christianity anymore. And one of the reasons that I became an activist, 20 years ago, was because I realized that every law that Christian politicians will create to further their own faith will end up being implemented by the next dominant faith. And I don't understand how these people don't see that coming. But then, they're all dominionists. They all end times people. They all think that Jesus is coming back any minute now.
Absolutely, yeah. They're not planning for 20 years down the road. I thought that the guy that wrote the ACE curriculum wrote a book in 1987 where he predicted that Jesus would come back in or around the year 2000. I never expected to reach the age of 25. I'm 32 now, and there's no way I thought.
If it helps you feel any better, I was raised by people who told me daily that all the governments of the world were about to collapse. I want you to understand, I spent my entire childhood aware that there was already an Antichrist, and that we were on the verge of an apocalypse, and that after this apocalypse, we were all going to be living like the Road Warrior. That we were all going to be, driving these ridiculous cars and fighting over canned goods. This was what I was told was going to be my inevitable future.
Right.
And at some point, somebody in my family said that it was the same person that told me that that the world is going to end any minute now for 6, 7, 8 years up to this point. Suddenly tells me that I should open an IRA account at the bank because then when I'm 75, I'll be a millionaire. How can you tell me that if banks won't exist next year, as you've been telling me my entire life? And it was that moment when they said that thing that completely contradicted what I'd been raised with my entire life. I'm like, oh, you're full of shit, and always have been.
but I think that, I think the adults that raised me in it were saying all this stuff, but their view of it was tempered by some experience of reality. Whereas I was a kid, so I was not tempered by reality in any way. I absolutely believed all of it. and without really any pause. And I was really, so I believe what you believe, except that I thought I was going to be in heaven. And that's part of the reason why this curriculum is so crap. Like, that's part of the reason why the education in fundamentalist Christian schools is what it is because they do not really think that equipping us for life on earth is the highest priority. They think that the highest priority is, you need the basics. They want, it's basically the 3 R's, or 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. And enough to survive. But basically what you need to do is make sure you're born again, so that when the rapture happens, you'll get taken, and convert as many people as possible. So be equipped to do that, and just be able to survive until such times as the rapture happens. But in terms of educating you to the highest level, or fulfilling your creative talents or whatever, your creative talents are only useful in as much as they can be used for evangelism. Otherwise, you'll have a chance to make up for all that stuff when we get into heaven.
This is probably going to be lost on you and a lot of other people listening to this. But one of the advantages that I have over religious indoctrination is that the weird ass pseudo woo, or whatever it was that you want to call it, that I held onto at this point in my life, let's say 1981 or thereabouts. That was back when Heavy Metal magazine was big. As a matter of fact, Heavy Metal had just come out with a movie. And so I was convinced, because I had a neo-pagan sort of counter culture spiritualism, wherein I believed that that if I die, then my spiritual essence would be absorbed into the biosphere, the plasma or the ectoplasm of the planet, and that I would be reincarnated, but not necessarily in this world, and certainly not in the same body. So I mean, I had, of all the back at that time, and I'm sure you don't remember, the fantasy magazines and such back at that time, I was expecting that I would be reincarnated 1,000 times in 1,000 different bodies in 1,000 different worlds, and that it was just going to be an eternity of semi science fantasy adventure. So when it finally happened, that I realized that eventually, at last, that there was no such thing as a soul, and there wasn't, in fact, there was no kind of supernatural anything, no telepathy, no telekinesis, no astral projection, no spiritual form, absolutely none of it was true. I was in my mid-30s, and I felt like a complete idiot. How did I invest my entire life? And the only advantage I have over the Christians is that my spiritual afterlife kicked ass. The promises that I was going to get after I die included, the whole road warrior lifestyle and women, studded leather piracy and on wheels. It was great. It was so much better than what the Christians offered.
It sounds like a Judas Priest video.
Exactly. Yep, wild, hedonistic, psychedelic, drug-induced, naked, teenage, heavy metal sex fantasies on wheels. That's what I was headed for.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah, well, if you're gonna believe something, you might as well. If you're gonna believe fiction, you might as well make it good fiction.
Yeah. I was such an idiot that I didn't realize that's what it was. There's my confession.
I had no idea about that. That's really funny.
So your studies, getting back to that,
sure.
and the goal and where you want to go with this.
Right. So yeah, it was just I ended up feeling like I pretty much had to do this PhD, because I felt that the research needed to be done on what people who have been to these schools experienced, and I realized that person that could do it, because what I needed to do was interview people that have been through this system of education, and finding those people is hard. There's no database anywhere. Actually, there is. The people that distribute the curriculum in the UK, Christian Education Europe, do have a list of former members, and I know this because they gave my details to someone without my permission. But they would not share that, I think, with most academic researchers, unless they believe that the academic researcher was very much on their side. And failing that, it's really hard to find people. But I knew that I had a network partly because I've been blogging about this and people have contacted me, and partly because of people that I went to school with. And that meant that I could find these people to interview them, which another interviewer couldn't do. And the other thing was that they would talk to me. So particularly the ones who were abused while they were at school or who find it very traumatic to talk about it, they would talk to me because they knew that I got it. And they wouldn't necessarily have talked to another researcher. So I felt this research needed to exist, and I felt that I was the only person that was in a position to make it happen. So I did it. And I interviewed 23 people that have been to these schools. I tried my damnedest to get a cross-section of the views from the very pro to the very anti. The very pros didn't want to speak to me, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. There's a section in my thesis about this. It's entertaining. They didn't like me. But I did end up speaking to a few of the people that are in favor of it. And what I found was the stuff about purity and like the sexual education really screws people up, and I was really glad to get that in the thesis, because that's something that I had wanted to talk about, but I didn't have hard evidence for it in the way that I had hard evidence for the creationist stuff. So I hadn't talked about it, but all these people sharing their experiences of how purity culture has affected and continues to affect their ability to pursue romantic and sexual relationships was I thought very moving and really important. Like, people don't think of education, I think, as beyond how it affects your chances of going to college or getting a job, but actually education is about setting you up for your whole life. And if you are negatively impacted in how you can pursue a romantic relationship, for lots of people, like, romantic relationships are a central part of having a fulfilling life. And lots of people find, probably most people, that if you can't have satisfying sexual relationships, you can't be fulfilled as a person. So if you've got an education system that is fucking up people's ability to have happy, loving relationships, then you have a education system that is screwing them over. So I was really...
You're not even talking about necessarily sex. You know, there's all of these other relations, or all these other elements in religious instruction. We were talking to somebody last night that had just come out of what she considered a cult situation and wanted to meet somebody about that, where they're talking about how you're raised, and we know a number of people that are like this. They were raised in a very religious community, and so you're told that the women are supposed to be vessels of men, and that this is the reason women exist, is to be subservient to, and useful for their men and attractive to their men. That's their purpose, right? And they're not supposed to make the decisions or do anything else. And then very often what ends up happening, we know a number of people that have done this, where they come away from the family thing and they get married, where the father hands over the property to the new husband, and then the husband is equally manipulative, right? And so they end up in the same kind of oppressive situation, and they often don't even realize that it is. So a lot of people, come out to be like 30 years old before they realize what they should have been able to enjoy properly, for the last 10 years at least.
Yeah, it's damning. I think one of the saddest, I tell people about this a lot. One of my participants described to me how she was bisexual, and she'd known that she was bisexual for a long, long time, and that there was a message in one of her science books that said that homosexuality was on a level with murder and stealing, and this had really stayed with her. And when she met a woman when she was in her 20s who liked her, and they liked each other, and they wanted to pursue a relationship, but she ended up pushing that woman away because she could not escape the feeling in her mind that she would be doing something terrible if she were to pursue a relationship with that woman. And that's heartbreaking. And then the same participant later in the interview told me about how there'd been another time when she'd wanted to have an abortion, but she had felt, even though she was a campaigner for women's rights now, and believes in a woman's rights to choose for everyone else, for herself personally, she couldn't let herself do it because she thought that she would be psychologically destroyed, was the phrase that she used, if she were to have an abortion. So she had a kid instead. It was a life-changing decision, and of course she loves that kid. But people should be able to make decisions about their own lives based on rational thought process, not on irrationally indoctrinated fears. And what's interesting is
they're not taught both sides. They're not given two different perspectives on political policies either. They're given no choices or anything. They're told exactly what they're allowed to think.
Right. But what's interesting, and this was kind of, I hadn't seen this coming. I thought of indoctrination as being binary. I thought either you were indoctrinated and you believed all this shit, or you weren't indoctrinated and you rejected it all. What I hadn't seen, even though now that I have seen it, I realize it's true of my own life as well, is that there's this intermediate gray stage where you rationally say, no, that's not true anymore. She could rationally say abortion is a woman's choice, and a fetus is not a full human person. But she couldn't bring herself to have the abortion because there's an irrational voice in her head that will not go away. And it was the same for me, in that I had a rational part of me that said, I know that humanists and atheists are great people. I've met loads of them and they're lovely people. And yet there is an irrational part of me which is surprised every time I meet a humanist or an atheist who is a nice person, because I've still got this ingrained bigotry against humanists and atheists. And for a long time, my knee-jerk reaction upon seeing a fossil was, if it was dated in the millions of years ago, I went immediately, that's not true. That was my first thought. And then I had to go, oh, wait, no, I accept science now. Now, obviously, my examples are much less serious than hers, much less. But there's this range of ways in which I call them ghost beliefs, because the belief is dead and yet it continues to haunt us. And that is for me, that's why this matters so much, because it's not just, oh, you can overcome this indoctrination as an adult and go and live a completely normal life. It's like, no, this will be with me probably forever. Actually, I'll probably always be managing this.
I've talked to a lot of people who come away from lifelong, indoctrination, like what we're talking about right now, and endure years of nightmares over the concept of hell, for example.
Yeah, I had a nightmare about hell.
Identify fully as atheists now, but in that twilight of sleep, they still have these terrors.
Yeah, I woke up in the night quite early in doing the process of writing my PhD, sweating, going, fuck, I'm going to hell. It didn't take that long after I woke up to go, oh no, I'm not. But still, and that was 2012. So and for ages, I mean, the nightmares that I had were about the people around my Christian school. I had nightmares about them for ages. I would be out minding my own business in this dream, and I would run into the woman who was my supervisor in my ACE school, and I would try to explain to her why what she had done was wrong and how it harmed me. And either there would be an invisible hand squeezing my throat, so my throat closed up, or I would just cough and I would be unable to speak, or my mouth sealed up so that I didn't have a mouth anymore. And I don't think you need to be a psychotherapist to kind of interpret that dream. And interesting, since I started campaigning, talking more publicly about this, since I did the thesis, I haven't had that dream in a while. It was literally that, I felt that they had taken away my voice, and I've been able to kind of find my voice a bit by doing this.
I have one more confession since you brought that up. I occasionally have dreams where, I feel like a hypocrite, because suddenly in my dream I'll be fighting ghosts or demons or zombies or something like this, and I'm angry at myself because I go around saying that these things don't exist, and here I am fighting them because I'm in a dream. And that's where these things are. Yeah. But when I'm in that dream, I don't realize the hypocrisy of it.
Well, it sounds like a cool dream. I wish I could fight zombies in my dreams.
Yeah, well. I want you to give me a wrap up, if you would, unless you've got something else that you need to cover. It sounds like we probably hit the bulk of it, unless there's something else you need to throw in.
Let me just say two things real quick. Yeah. One is the new edition of this program includes, you will not be surprised to learn, climate change denial, which I think makes stopping this a bit more urgent, because Jesus Christ. Two, there are voucher programs in numerous states in the US. Most recently, Florida and North Carolina have been reported on, where schools like this can get state funding to put kids through this education system. And there, I think there is some potential leverage for, although the First Amendment defense is not always being accepted lately. But you know, it seems to me very clearly that on First Amendment, this is a violation of the First Amendment, and that seems to be the best opportunity for stopping that.
Yeah, well, the First Amendment doesn't get a lot of respect, especially like
right
here
now.
in Texas. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, and,
sure.
and the current administration of this country has been doing everything they can to undermine absolutely every provision of the First Amendment since even before Trump was elected.
Yeah, right. Well, it was Americans United challenged one of these voucher programs last year and lost the appeal on First Amendment grounds. So the argument now is it's okay to fund these religious schools as long as you would fund any religion. It doesn't, as long as it's not only, but of course in practice, you know, it's not like there are a bunch of Sikh schools seeking voucher funding.
Well, once we actually seen this, where you know the Christian schools will go to court, you know, to do something for religious freedom or whatever. But the moment a Muslim school also qualifies for the same thing, then suddenly the Christians are all about the First Amendment. Yeah,
shocker. Okay, so to wrap this up, then. I think what I've realized is that the most helpful thing that I can do now, for a long time, I kind of wanted to bring this down. I wanted this to stop. And I still hope that there will come a day when fundamentalist education is not a thing anymore and kids are educated in a way that allows them to think for themselves and to make the best of their talents. But where I've realized that my research has been helpful has been in helping people who went through this kind of education themselves to understand that they're not alone. The people that have read my thesis are like, hey, here's 20 other people that feel exactly like I did. I thought I was the only one. And I think that's worthwhile. So I think that aspect of the importance of blogging and podcasting about this is something that I personally underrated for myself. I was seeing myself as only a political campaigner, but the idea that actually, you know, our lives don't have to be fucked up forever because of this thing that happened to us. I think that's kind of hopeful.
All right, I'm going to close it on that. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Thanks, Aaron. Good night.